This is Charles Barkley, and you're listening to Tim Graham and Friends.
CTBK gives executives and owners of mid-market businesses unparalleled confidence and clarity so you can focus on strategic objectives and organizational success. Their multidisciplinary advisors, accountants, and team members have a wealth of experience and are all available and responsive to each client to ensure the most effective advice, actions, and outcomes no matter the situation or complexity level. That experience base and one-team approach, combined with integrated and efficient way of operating, enable them to be truly proactive partners, doing the best thing for their client every time. Visit ctbk.com or call 716-630-2400 to learn how CTBK can work for you.
I'm Bucky Gleason, and you're listening to Tim Graham and Friends. Tim Graham has friends?
Welcome to a very special edition of Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. I'm Tim Graham of The Athletic, here with Jonah Bronstein of Bronstein Sports Plus. And joining us here on the podcast is not the usual friend of Tim Graham and Friends. He's been kind enough over the last year to give me his time. Maury Povich is joining us from Montana, fresh off the golf course. How you hitting them these days, Maury?
Well, I'm hitting them okay. I mean, I used to have a really good handicap, a low handicap. Now I'm at around a 4, and I'm fighting hard to keep that handicap. I was pretty good in my middle ages, but middle age to me is like 50 and 60 because, as you know, Tim, I didn't get a golf lesson until I was 50, and so. I guess my great golf highlight is at the age of 60, I qualified for the U.S. Senior Amateur and made match play. And that's probably my biggest golf trophy. And that got me into 3 British Senior Amateurs. So I kind of rest my laurels on that.
Well, I know that one of your great honors is being in the Greater Washington Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. And a big part of that is because of your golf prowess, 5-time champion at your club and Woodmont Country Club, I should say. And it's you're 85 now. Yeah, how often have you shot your age?
Well, first of all, quite frankly, if I shoot my age, I'm very depressed. I don't count the times anymore. I wanted to do it, believe it or not, before I was 70. And I can't tell you the number of times, but I wanted to shoot my age in the 60s. And I can't tell you how many times I stood on the 18th hole sometimes and was 3 under par at the age of 69 or 4 under par at the age of 68. And the next thing you know, I double bogey the last hole or bogey the last hole. I mean, that's how crazy this game is. And so I was able to do it at 69, but it was deep into the year. It was like August. But I finally did it then. And now the only thing left for me, my coach since the age of 50, I never had a lesson before I was 50, is Peter Costas. And Peter has said, I said to him, I don't know. I mean, I don't have any more goals. He says, I'll give you a goal. And I said, okay, what's the goal? He says, I want you to break the record for how many shots under your age you can shoot. And I said, I've never even heard of that, but I know for a fact that that's the only thing I do. My record is I've shot 14 under my age. And I said, so what's the record? He says, 22. Go catch it.
Wow. And what's the score? I mean, what was the age in the score?
I shot 70 this year when I shot 70 when I was 84 one day, and in Florida at a course I belonged to, Emerald Dunes in West Palm Beach. And so that's all I think about now is how much under my age can I shoot, and 14 is my record so far.
How good
22
were
is
you?
incredible.
How good were you around age 50 when you got that first lesson and started playing the
I was.
game?
It's interesting, Jonah. Uh, I was, I played sports and I was back in the 50s when I played, you played baseball, basketball, and football, and that's what I played. And so I had some hand-eye coordination. And so I never played golf until I was 30. And then I started to play, and I probably was like maybe a 15 handicap when I started. And then I got myself down to a 5 or 6 handicap, and I won some club championships at Woodmont Country Club outside Washington, D.C., where I was born. And then later on, I won about 5 club championships when I moved to New York. I belonged to a great club in New Jersey called Hollywood Golf Club, and I won 5 championships there. And then for my 50th birthday, Connie said, I'm going to give you as a present. She did all this research and found out, she says, this guy, Peter Costas, is the golf god. And so she brought him to New Jersey for me at the age of 50. And I got my first lesson. And then I think I barely got to scratch for about a year. And then at 60, he said that I played a lot of golf with him and Gary McCord, members of Whisper Rock in Arizona. And they said, you ought to start playing competitively. So I joined a great group called the Society of Seniors, which is all these great former amateur champions, mid-amateur champions. And so I qualified for the U.S. Senior Amateur in Charlotte, North Carolina, that I played in when I was 60. So that was year 2000. And there were 64 who qualified, 150 go to the site. We play 36 holes medal play. I finished about 13th, qualified. Forgot to reset the bar and lost in the first round, but that got me into 3 British senior amateurs. So that's my highlight, and I've been messing around with it ever since. And I can't. I just love it. It's my addiction. Connie's the best because she doesn't play. She allows me to play. For all those people who play golf, you must have a significant other who allows you to play.
And to those who are familiar with your show and watch it until the very end, they will know that golf is so much a part of your identity that
Right.
Mopo, your production company, is
Right.
a putt dropping into the hole.
Right.
And that leads us to why you're here, and how we came into contact. April 2023, I had a thought in my head that I couldn't shake. And I'd come to a realization that when I'm writing, in my writing process, and I've talked about it on this podcast a handful of times, Jonah knows about it, but when I'm faced with a big project, I generally will write overnight. I'm an all-nighter. I'm better at night than I am in the morning. And I will have anything on from the West Coast that I can find, whether it's a basketball game, a hockey game, a baseball game. And when the West Coast schedule is over, and I guess I didn't even realize I was doing it, I found myself going to my queue on the DVR and playing Maury episodes. And I didn't think much of it until I started thinking about it. Came to realize that I watch Maury while I write because I view it as a sports program. And it has the ebbs and flows of sports. And we're going to ask Maury about it, and he has his thoughts on it. And so I don't want to necessarily give mine because I was on a little bit of a fishing expedition when I reached out to his production company. Maury doesn't shoot anymore, so I had no idea where this email was going to go. And I said, hey, I want to do an ode to Maury as a sports program. I have no idea if Maury's around, if he'd be willing to talk to me. Before I could even wake up the next morning, I have a voicemail pretty much wondering how many screws I have loose and it's from Maury Povich himself, quickly getting back to me to say, what is wrong with you? Give me a call. We'll talk about it. And at the time, Maury, you kind of hadn't thought of it that way, even though, and we'll get into your deep history and background with sports, as we've kind of flirted with it already with your golf game. But it's in your fiber. Sports is in your fiber. It has been since you were a small child, but I guess we'll start there. Your thoughts that your life's work as somebody who was going to maybe get into sports reporting on the television side ends up getting into hard news and then your current affair and your multiple TV shows. How is it that you think sports has been a thread throughout your professional life?
Well, I think more than anything else, in terms of my professional life, I think it goes back to when I was a child. I think we ought to mention now that I am the son of probably one of the greatest sports writers who ever existed. His name was Shirley Povich. He wrote for the Washington Post, believe it or not, for 75 years. His last column at the age of 92 was the day before he died. And the column was an interesting one because he was taking on his colleague at the Washington Post, the great Tom Boswell, who is a great columnist in his own right, and his specialty was baseball, and so was my father. And Boswell, the day before, had written this column about how Mr. McGuire, Mark McGuire, has had all these 3-run home run games and how he was going to annihilate the Babe Ruth record and how he is going to be the greatest home run hitter of all time. And my father's rejoinder to his dear friend Tom was, hold on, young man. The greatest home run hitter is Babe Ruth. I don't care what your friend Mr. McGuire is doing. He's saying that he says that he devotes all of his power to these nutrition shakes that he has in the clubhouse. My father didn't know a damn thing about steroids or anything. And so he was questioning Mr. McGuire and his nutrition shakes. And so the next day, my father passed away at the age of 92 from a heart attack in the backseat of my brother's car because they were out to dinner. And we knew he had heart problems. And so his last column and his obituary were printed on the same page at the Washington Post the next day.
And it should be noted. I'm sorry. I thought you.
Sure.
I let you take a breath there, and I just went ahead and interrupted you, which is,
That's it.
I know people want to listen to
As
you.
my father would say, just another interruption by Maury Povich interviewing some personality.
He filed a column that was 1,370 words at 92 years old. So this was not somebody going through the motions. Sometimes you see an emeritus columnist or somebody who is just kind of hanging on. This was not the case. He was prolific until the end. 1,370 words, for those who might not know, is probably the length of it's 2 columns. It's about a 2-column length. I would say that the standard column is, maybe it's three times.
Believe it or not, Tim, in the 1930s, when he was covering the old Washington Senators, in the 1940s and the 1950s into the 1960s, he was the beat reporter for the baseball team. He wrote a game day story. He wrote a color story, sidebar story, and he wrote his column 6 days a week. I mean, no one is that prolific when it comes to writing these days. You just don't, if you get somebody writing 2 or 3 times a week, that's a lot. And he was writing 6 a week. And he would always say to me, he says, he'd wake up and he says, I just don't know what I'm going to write about. I just don't know what I'm going to write about today. And then he writes about something. He says, if you're really stuck, he says, for any columnist who is stuck as to what they want to write about, make sure that the subject is something every reader knows. Get a personality who they know about, and that will get you started.
In Buffalo, it is right about the quarterback, stupid. That's usually
right, exactly.
the way you hear it from your editor.
Yeah.
Just a couple of things about Maury Povich. I don't need to tell our guest here, but just to underscore how legendary and what a luminary Shirley Povich was. He covered every World Series from 1924 to 1997. He covered Dempsey Tunney, the long count fight. He was at Lou Gehrig's farewell speech in Yankee Stadium. He covered that and then covered Cal Ripken breaking Lou Gehrig's games played streak in person, not off TV or anything like that, at Camden Yards. Also, he is known for these leads that you have heard probably. Maybe you didn't know who they were, especially if you're a casual sports fan or if you're young. But the Don Larson perfect game, the lead, hell froze over, the 1,000,000-to-1 shot came in, a month of Sundays hit the calendar. Don Larson today pitched a no-hit, no-run, no-man reach first game in a World Series. Now, one of the greatest leads of all time, and one of my favorite sentences in a sports story of all time. Hell froze over, a 1,000,000-to-1 shot coming in. Okay, those are phrases you hear. A month of Sundays hit the calendar. I've just always loved that sentence because I don't know why. I just did. And that's the lyricism of sports writing. And then, of course, writing about the Washington Commanders, using finger quotes, the Washington football team.
Yeah.
A couple of different lines about that. Shirley,
first of all, they were the last all white football team in the National Football League.
The Redskins' colors are burgundy, gold, and Caucasian was one line. And then the famous lead, Jim Brown, born ineligible to play for the Redskins, integrated their end zone 3 times yesterday.
Yeah.
Do you have, I mean, you were behind the scenes and you got to work with him a little bit. Do you have, those are our favorites. Those are the ones that got out there in the world. When it comes to his work as a sports writer and what it takes to do it, what do you recall about that?
Well, I'll give you a famous story between my father and me. I was a very young sports reporter. This is around, and I was working behind the scenes for the broadcasters and the Washington Senators. So I was at the game all the time. So the Yankees are in town and my father's in the dugout and I'm sitting with him and he's interviewing Casey Stengel, the great manager of the Yankees. And so I'm listening to them. And my father's column the next day start with an in quote, ends with an out quote. And it's nothing but Casey Stengel. And anybody know who's Casey? He just meanders, talks all these crazy things. He just doesn't know where to stop and dangling participles and everything in the world. And so that was the entire column. So I said to Dad, Dad, I was there the entire time you interviewed Casey. He didn't say half of those things. And my father said, he should have. So there are certain personalities you have poetic license with. I mean, and guess what? There is no way Yogi Berra said all those things. there was a scribe there, and I think they embellished a bit.
What happened? And I've heard some of the stories, but maybe you can reflect for us. You were going to get into the sports side of things,
right?
As you mentioned, you worked for the Senators broadcast staff as a producer to Bob Wolf for a long time,
right? Yeah.
What made the turn for you from sports journalism to hard news?
Well, this is I started for the doing sports first in radio, but then in 1966 in Washington, the now Fox station did the first 10 o'clock news. Everybody was doing 11 o'clock news is on the East Coast. And started at 10 o'clock news, and I got to be the sports commentator. And so I started there in the fall of 1966, and then within 3 or 4 months, I was doing a talk show in the afternoon with some other people. And so I'm now doing a daily kind of a Today Show type talk show, and I was doing sports. So that's in 66. Now I do sports all the way into the early 70s. And I'm now covering George Allen, the coach of the then Washington Redskins. And I always thought that sports was somewhat confining a little bit. But what set me off was that George Allen had a news conference in the locker room after a game one time. And I'm looking around, and and this is the early 70s now. This is 71, 72. And there's this bottle of pills. Now, they could have been salt pills. Who the hell knows what they were? I said, Coach, can you tell me what's in that? What are the pills in that bottle? And he says to me, Maury, are you with us or against us? And I said to myself, I got to get out of the sports business. If that's what they think, if that's what they want sports reporters to be with you all the time because you're a hometown guy and all that, they're bigger fish to fry. And so I concentrated on news after that.
With the way sports journalism is now, by the way, I just want to.
By the way, you tell me, Tim, you're in locker room. You've been in locker rooms, right? Yeah. Are they still like that? If you're a hometown reporter and you're reporting on the hometown team, do they expect you to be partial?
I think they do again, and Jonah's in there too. And I think it got away from that for a long time. And it was, I think the fans appreciated the objective view. But I think with social media and the teams with their own media people, they might have an in-house radio guy who has a show on the local station. They have writers for their website, multiple writers. They have pretty much their own little TV studios. They hire people from television networks to do these videos. And I think that journalists today, sports journalists, almost feel a need to pander for their access because it's so available with the in-house people, and that we are viewed as flies on their ass. The players don't quite understand the nuance of what we do versus the people who are there to ask the patty cake questions and promote the team. And I think that that's probably within the last 10 or 15 years. But prior to that, I think in between, I think that there was a new breed of journalist. The Philadelphia Inquirer was big with it. And I can't remember what the name of that crew was, but Larry Merchant was among them. There were these young hotshot reporters who kind of came in, and
I knew Larry well.
Yeah. I think it's been cyclical in that regard.
Yeah. My father, as he matured and grew older, he wouldn't go into the locker room after a game. He didn't care what pitch was thrown. He didn't care about how you felt. He wanted to write about the game the way he saw it, his observations, his conclusions. And, you bring the reader along, and if they don't like it, so they won't read it. And that was it. And didn't really, he just felt that he didn't need to have to go and ask somebody how they felt when they did something.
Maury, I just on that point real quick, Jonah, I'm sorry. In my research, I see a plethora of athletes where names are dropped regarding your father and the great relationships they had. Walter Johnson being among them, by the way. Walter Johnson, the big train. And I think Tony Kornheiser had the line, or maybe it was Michael Wilbon, that said he presumably nicknamed the big train because planes hadn't been invented yet, and your dad covered him. Who were the athletes he didn't like or he didn't get along with, or that because he just didn't, he thought they were
Well,
full of shit or they were a-holes?
well, I'll tell you the two that he remarkably got along and who trusted him. Ted Williams, the legendary Ted Williams. Everybody knows about him and the Boston sports writers. I mean, they were at odds his entire career, and at times legitimately so, and at other times they just drove him nuts. And when Ted wanted to say something, he called my father. Joe DiMaggio in New York had the same problem with the New York writers. He was very standoffish. He was very aloof and didn't want to talk much to the writers. And when he had something on his mind, he called my father. And Williams and DiMaggio were not friends. So it's like, who do you respect enough to get the word out? And at the same time, he might criticize them as well. So those are two examples of the people who trusted him. It's very interesting. The Muhammad Ali relationship with my father was strange. My father, when Muhammad Ali was Cassius Clay, my father thought he was just a loudmouth kind of a guy who really danced around the ring, didn't have much of a punch, didn't understand any of all the braggadocio that Clay was doing. And as soon as he was vacated from his titles because of refusing to go into the draft, my father completely turned and said, "This is the worst decision ever. How could you do this to someone?" When he sits there and says to him that he doesn't want to fight those Viet Cong, and that he shouldn't have to go to jail, and at the same time take away your titles, as good as he was at that time. He completely changed and became a devout supporter of Muhammad Ali. In fact, one time on the talk show that I did, I had Muhammad Ali and my father on. And Ali used to read my father too. And so we're on there, and I, of course, made the stupid, stereotypical mistake and said to Ali, and we knew each other pretty well. We shared the same birthday. I said, Muhammad, I said, "You're not going to end up, are you, like somebody like Bo Jack, who's shining shoes on the streets of Miami, are you?" He says, "You say that to me? You say that to me? You do that stereotypical stuff with me? You will never be as smart as your daddy." Put me in my place very, very quickly.
I'm sure you've heard worse insults, though.
Oh, yeah, sure. Well, my father was not a fan of Cosell's. Not at all. He thought that Cosell was a fake. And to prove it, in the 1972 Olympics in Munich, of course, when all the Israelis got killed, and Cosell was saying that he got through some fence and was very close to the action and everything. And my father actually was involved in that and got through and was on the front pages of the Post for like a week. He says to me, "Cosell was never even near that. He's just bullshitting. I mean, he's never, ever near that." So later on, when Howard wrote his book, Tell It Like It Is, he came on my show in Washington, and I introduced him as, "Ladies and gentlemen, our guest is Howard Cosell. He wrote a book called Tell It Like It Is. He wears a toupee, and he changed his name. Welcome, Howard."
No kidding.
Yeah.
Is that
was the
is that
that was
online
the
somewhere?
end.
Does that exist?
No, I don't know. But it was the last time Cosell ever was in my company. That's for sure. I mean, and first of all, tell it like it is. Are you kidding me? I mean, look, Howard had his moments. I can understand that, and I think Ali made him, as far as I'm concerned. But he had his moments, Monday Night Football and everything else. But to write a book calling it "Tell It Like It Is" when you're wearing a toupee and you've changed your name, come on.
Maury was mentioning the old time sports writers. Many of them didn't go into the locker rooms and didn't find that necessary for their coverage and their writing, which is something I've thought of a time or two, whether it's deadlines or laziness or whatnot, when we write something and don't get quotes. And I think, well, I'm just honoring the tradition of the form. But I was curious if either of you knew, the first sports writer who went into the locker rooms and kind of pioneered that style of getting reaction and getting quotes and making it, more prevalent and something that's really in all forms of sports writing now.
I think it all. I think it's where it really started about locker room stuff and describing what was going on in the locker room. I think all those sports writers around the late '60s who came in. I don't want to say Dick Schaap, but Dick Schaap was the editor of the New York sports editor of the New York Tribune, the Herald Tribune, and a lot of those young writers kind of took the Hunter Thompson view of sports. My father wasn't a great fan. I think they were called the Chipmunks or something like that. I can't remember. Maybe you do, Tim. I can't remember. But there was a time when they.
I think that's the group I was talking about. That Larry Merchant was in there. That was, and
Right.
It was the Philadelphia Daily News. I think I might have said the
Right.
Enquirer, but I think that's that group. And they were baseball writers.
Yes.
Who really they competed so hard that they were looking for just a little extra thing, and I think that's what drove them to it.
Right. Yeah. And I think that it morphed into that, and now, I mean, whether it's football or baseball or basketball, when I see stuff, where coaches are talking after the games and things like that, it sounds so banal. The questions are tame and the answers are worse.
Yeah, and it does sort of lend itself to letting the sources write the story for you or carry the broadcast. But from what I've read, actually, in this book here, The Great American Sports Page, and your father's featured prominently in that, but it mentioned in that book a gentleman by the name of Frank Graham from the New York Sun, who maybe you remember. And I was going to ask maybe if he's an old descendant, or Tim's a descendant of that.
No relation, nor of Katharine Graham or any of the Washington Post Grahams.
No. It's he was a New York writer, wrote a lot of biographies of baseball players, but I'm losing the name of somebody who used to write for the New York Post, who can't remember. But yeah, I mean, it's changed.
The Chipmunks, by the way, were a group that included Larry Merchant, Stan Isaacs, Steve Jacobson, George Vesey, Phil Pepe, Leonard Schechter, and a handful of others. New York, Philadelphia.
Except for Larry, most of those guys were all New York guys. I knew Pepe, and I knew, and Vesey became a great columnist for the New York Times. George did.
Without question. Maury, and I know that you talk about these issues and the work that your family has done in helping to form the Maury Povich Center for Sports Journalism at the University of Maryland. And by the way, for those listening, go to the website. Their panel discussions, their symposiums are there on YouTube, and you can hear the greats, not only in history, but the current sports reporters. It's mostly writers, but there's a lot of TV and there's some radio elements to it also, about how they cover the more difficult topics, social things, the business of sports, not just the locker room. And that leads me, Maury, to if the business of sports and all these things, social issues, political, global issues. Do you think if sports writing was as wide open frontier as it is now, I got into this to cover games and seasons. I didn't get into it to cover collective bargaining agreements and lockouts and labor this and needing to know how to contact the public information officer of the various police agencies around the country and having to deal with whatever. Do you think it would be different? Do you think you might have stayed with it if it wasn't so confining as just being for us or against us in the Washington locker room?
I could see reporting sports today because of the width and breadth of it and how it now has affected everyday life. Yeah, it was very confining for me back then, but I think there are so many layers to it now. I mean, even something like golf, okay, as as staid and stodgy as golf has been for years and years, and then all of a sudden this upstart league takes form, and all of these competitive juices between Live and the PGA Tour and what's going to happen and the personalities and I mean, just the fact that I know a lot of people. For instance, I've known Brandel Chambly for a long time. He's at times a very, very good reporter. But I can tell you this: there is no doubt in my mind that his coverage of the United States Open was absolutely on the verge of bias. The way he talked about DeChambeau and Bryson DeChambeau, because Chambly hates the Live Tour, and if you go back and listen to what he says in the back nine about how he was lucky that he didn't get it here, or he was lucky here, or he was lucky there, that the ball wasn't, it was playable when it shouldn't have been playable, and I'm shocked. I was shocked, but it only lends to all these different layers in covering sports. And I would be much more conducive to be in that arena today than it was in the early 1970s when I left it.
I want to touch on Muhammad Ali a little bit more, and then I'll ask you about Maury as a sports show, and maybe whether or not DNA testing should be an Olympic event. Seeing as how breakdancing, and they had some various sports. I think maybe maybe there should even be a Maury media guide like you have for different teams, the different records. Like, for instance, most fathers, with failed results, or the record for the most fathers tested without a positive, that type of thing. But I wanted to ask about Ali because you attended a lot of those fights.
Yes.
And I know that you were also at the Rumble in the Jungle against George Foreman and Zaire.
No, I wasn't. My father.
Oh, you weren't.
Was.
Oh, I'm sorry.
He was there.
Oh, your father was. Okay. Well, that was my question. Were you there? Did you go as some sort of an assistant, or did you go on your own?
I didn't go to the Rumble in the Jungle. I didn't go there, but it's very interesting. I was still doing sports in Washington. There were when Ali and Frazier met for the first time, it was a closed circuit telecast. I was doing sports in Washington at the time in '71. And so Jerry Perenchio was running the closed circuit telecast. He thought it up. He sold it. And one of the items in the contract was that neither Ali nor Joe Frazier would do any interviews before the fight, unless it was promoting the fight for closed circuit. My father and Angelo Dundee, who was, of course, the trainer for Muhammad Ali, were very close. And I wanted to do a documentary leading up to the fight. And so I went down to Miami to the Fifth Street Gym, and Angelo pushes me in there to do an interview with Ali. And I'm just overblown. And I get this interview with Ali. Nobody had ever done this interview. And I hold it for the documentary right before the fight. And then my father knew Yancey Durham, who was the manager for the trainer for Joe Frazier. And I went to Philadelphia to the gym there and in North Philadelphia and did the interview with Frazier. And I did this documentary, and it was, I mean, Ferencio went crazy and really got mad. He got mad at Ali, got mad at Frazier, but at the same time, I had done this for the Metro Media, which is now the Fox stations, and so I had done that, and then I covered what many people say is the greatest fight ever. Ali Frazier won in Madison Square Garden.
And whether they thought so at the time, you were promoting the hell out of that fight by showing it. So they should have been thankful.
It was great. I mean, I was, I got very lucky, and it's to me, I think it's the best fight I ever was around. And later on, I mean, I used to cover Sugar Ray Leonard. I used to put Sugar Ray Leonard on when he was a 12-year-old fighting in the Prince George's County Little League stuff. And so I've known Sugar Ray forever. And so I've covered a lot of his fights too.
So with all of this, and we were talking about all this sports, I used the phrase earlier, I can't think of a better one, being in your fiber. I was surprised when we spoke on the phone last year for the first time when you said that it was not by design that Maury be structured as kind of a sports show, but it really does turn out to be that way. It's almost 3 rounds or 3 innings of setup, and you give one team a chance to bat. The other team gets a chance to take its swings. And then you decide who the winner is. There's an arena of people who are really excited about it, and they're invested in the outcome in 10 to 12 minutes. And there's a celebration, whether it be a bat flip or a touchdown celebration. There's something. There's
a winner and a loser.
Right, a bat flip or a back flip, as we've seen famously on your show.
Yes.
But is it a sports show? I mean, obviously not on purpose, but the things that are there are so, I guess the allegory that you have with life that you have in a boxing match or a football game, all the things that make it resonate with people on Sunday afternoons, seems to be there at 11 o'clock on your CW affiliate.
Yeah, there's a lot to that, especially with the result, whether it's a lie detector result, whether it's a paternity result. And I'll give you the sports reference. I mean, there are a couple of references that I really know about. Shaquille O'Neal used to watch my show all the time. He would bet with his buddies whether the guy was the father or not. I know NFL quarterbacks and NFL players who told me that they would be in the locker room, the show was on, and they would not go to practice so they found out who the father was. Even though the coaches are telling them to get the hell out of the locker room. And so athletes if they had an attraction to the show, it's because they thought the same way, that this was, it was not necessarily a sport, but it was a contest. And so therefore, they were attracted to it.
How, was there, obviously there were kind of 3 popular versions of your show. There was the DNA test, the lie detector,
right?
And I think the third, maybe a distant
out of control kids.
Yes, so the Scared Straight episodes.
Right.
How did it ever become too formulaic for you? And how did you stop from putting together a show where it didn't feel repetitive to you? And I know that maybe it's just enough that the characters are different on a daily basis.
I really believe that if I dug deep enough into each particular story, there would be nuggets that were different. It's only my version of being a columnist. You just keep digging for something. And I just felt that every single story, although there was this grand design of paternity, this woman was accusing this guy of being the father, and he does, but there were layers in there that were unique to that particular story. And so I got lucky because people used to ask me all the time, why would they come on the show? Why would they come on the show? I know why they would come on. They felt safer being with me, even though there was an audience, a live audience, an audience at home, safer with me and unburdening themselves than they would be at home. And I don't know how that happened in terms of why me, why come to me? But there was a connection that they always felt that I was either part of the family or something, and that they could come and sit with me and it would be safe, and they could get their story out and they could get all the emotion out.
A big part of that was the voice and the quarter zip. I think it was talking to Grandpa.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Everybody says, well, I always knew the voice. And I said, yeah, you knew the voice. Let me tell you where that voice came from. A lot of whiskey and a lot of cigarettes. That's where the voice came from. My earpiece went out.
Okay.
Here we go.
Did it fly across the room?
No, I'm all right.
Are you the most famous Maury of all time?
Well, there years and years ago, there was a very funny sports writer in Washington, D.C. named Maury Siegel. And Mo Siegel was great. My father actually started in Atlanta. He came to Washington. My father actually got him to Washington, and he was a dear friend of ours. But he was so funny that Mo Siegel would walk up and down the press box, whether it be a baseball game or a football game, and be the funniest comedian. And yet my father would say, he leaves all the best stuff on the floor of the damn press box, and you never see it in his columns. That's the only other Mo I know.
Maury, what's when you reflect on the show?
Yeah.
What are your proudest moments of the show? Because I do view it as journalism. And of course, I respect the hell out of you. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that would think that, an hour-long talk show like that automatically gets written off as in a category,
Sure.
with all the others, many of which did not succeed. But from a journalism sense,
in the 31 years that I did the show from 1991 to 2023, there were 75 talk shows during that time that were put in the cemetery for one reason or another. And I'm talking about the shows that lasted a year, and also Phil Donahue ended, Oprah ended. There were 75 of them. And what I'm proudest of is that I can take these themes of lie detector, out of control kids, and paternity, and tell you there were thousands of success stories where fathers got into the lives of these children. And we know if a child has two parents instead of one, they got a better chance. I was on for so long, I would bring a father back, denying this child as a baby, and bring the entire family back, where the father not only got involved with the child, but they ended up married. He and the woman got married, and they had other kids, and all these kids went to college, and all these kids got jobs, and And so I would go back 15, 20 years back on the show and bring these subjects to the show 20 years later. And couples, for instance, who the wife forgave the husband for cheating on her, and then they ended up being married 25 years later. I had out of control teenage girls who, once they saw themselves on the show and were so embarrassed of what they were doing on the show, that they changed their attitudes and they changed their lifestyle and ended up being very successful in life. And I used to go back, and that's what I hang my hat on. And I can take all the criticism of this is a trashy talk show and you're exploiting these people and you're doing all these things. And I can say, okay, just washes off my back. I got another story to tell.
How aware are you of, people my age that played hooky from school just to stay home and watch your show and follow the storylines? Because I know a lot of people that did that over the years.
I get it all the time, Jonah, from young adults like yourself who say, I tried to fake being sick so I didn't have to go to school so I could watch the show. Or I used to tell my mom all the time, I have a stomach ache. I can't go to school today. And it was all to watch the show. Yeah, a lot of kids playing hooky. I had college students who would DVR it because they were going to class when the show was on, and then they would come back to the dorm and watch it. Things like that. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. Yeah, one of the things I'm proudest of is we cut across everything. We were known as the youngest viewing audience show that there was in daytime. Most talk shows have a much older audience, but my show it cut across all social classes and it cut across all ages.
I think Tim missed a few afternoon deadlines because he got so caught up watching the show over the years.
No, I always knew it was. And by the way, with it being out of production, thankfully it's on twice a day in the Buffalo market.
Right.
At 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock.
Yeah.
And I am stockpiling episodes. Yes, I know they're reruns, but when there's so many of them, you recognize the faces, but you forget the outcome. So I'll keep them.
I'll tell you one of the reasons, Tim, that that it's still popular is that with social media now. I mean, I have 6.5 million followers on Facebook, 2 million on YouTube, another million on TikTok, a couple of million on Instagram, and they run the clips all the time. I saw a clip on Instagram today, and there was this parody, and they wanted to bring Anthony Edwards and Michael Jordan on my show to find out if Anthony Edwards was Michael Jordan's son.
Would you come out of retirement?
People believe that.
Would you come out of retirement for that one, Maury?
Well, yeah, of course. But the other one was, the other one was, there's this big rumor that Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson share the same father. Okay, Woody thinks they do because they're both from Texas, and apparently, their mothers were around this guy at the same time or something like that. And Woody wants to do a DNA test, and Matthew McConaughey is on the fence. So I did this viral video that I would come out of retirement to find out if this rumor was true.
Because there's these Shakespearean themes, and it is grand theater. It is grand theater. When I mention to people that I am such a fan and that it's part of my writing process, and one of the questions I inevitably will get is, don't you think it's fake? My answer is, if these people were actors or actresses, we would at least see them. They'd been busted by now because they'd appear in a commercial or something, or if they had aspiration. So I think it's 100% real. But in your vetting process, which I know is heavy to get somebody, did you ever catch somebody trying to fake their way out?
Sure. Absolutely. It happens all the time. It's very interesting because of my news background. we treated our production staff like it was a news bureau. I mean, we heaven forbid, if you're in the news business and you put on a story that's not true, you're in big trouble. It's the same thing with us. And so we had vetting like crazy from our production staff. Each producer knew that their career was on the line every day in terms of truthfulness. And so we were very lucky, and we've caught some people, but it all happened before they ever came to the show to be on the show. I don't think I've ever taped a segment where we had to throw out because it was a fake. Never got that far, thankfully. It's very interesting about staffs. I've been on 31 years. There were people who were been with me 30 years. There were people who've been with me 25 years, 20 years. Most of all my show producers have been at least with me for 20 years. And so there's a deep respect that goes on behind the scenes between, and I've always said, I mean, I've had producers go to other shows, and you said, Maury, you have no idea how great it was to work around you and the rest of the producers on your show. I went to this other show, which is a big show, and I mean, it's dog eat dog. Nobody likes each other. The talent doesn't. The talent doesn't want to be around the producers. I mean, I said, well, it was a family. It was a 30-year family, and I mean, even my cameraman and everybody else. I mean, I sent kids to college. I was able to. These guys and girls were able to raise families and have health care for all these years. And I mean, at the end, it was a very tearful celebration at the end when it all ended.
In 1998, when your father died, your career was already cemented. You had done great things.
Yeah.
So he got to witness your success.
Yeah, he did.
But
I'll tell you.
But you went another 25 years. What do you?
Yeah, that's true.
You ever?
So I'll tell you about my father. My father, I was a constant worry for my father. I guess of the three kids, my brother, my older brother, my younger sister, and we were all, by the way, I mean, my sister was the first woman senior editor of Newsweek. My wife, of course, is Connie Chung. My wife's husband, Steve Shepard, was the editor-in-chief of Business Week, and my brother, who was with the largest law firm in Washington, which was defending the Washington Post all the time. And then there's my father. We were a delicate media family. And my father always used to worry about me because I never had any money. I mean, I just burned a hole in my pocket. I mean, it didn't matter whether I was single or I was married. I mean, I never had any money. And so I wanted to show him before he died, left us, that he doesn't have to worry about me anymore. So when he was just about 90, late 80s, he goes to his home in Maine every summer for vacation. That's where he grew up. And so I sent a plane for him. It was a big Gulfstream plane. And he picked me up. I sent it to Washington. He picked me up in Teterboro in New Jersey. And he looked at me and he says, he's got all of his newspapers spread out on this table in this big plane. He looks at me and he says, I'm not going to worry about you anymore. And I'll tell you, for anyone, please, if your parents are worried about you in any way, make sure that you're able to give them confidence that you were fine before they died, because I still think of it to this day that I'm so happy I did that for my father, or he would have gone on to his greater life thinking that I still didn't have a dime. And so and the other story about him was when I was doing A Current Affair, and that was a big tabloid news show. And Tom Shales, who was the Pulitzer Prize winning critic for the Washington Post, writes a column about me doing A Current Affair and just annihilates me and uses every S word in the world. you are sordid, you are smarmy, you are this, you are that. And I called up my father and I said, Dad, Shales has just killed me in your paper, just killed me. Don't show it to mom. She doesn't have to see this. He says, oh no, son, just go about your business. I said, no, Dad, you don't understand. He says, no, son, you just go about your business. I said, well, he says, and I helped hire Tom Shales for the Washington Post. I said, yeah, Dad, but I'm your son. He says, yeah, but good writers are hard to find.
Well,
oh boy,
there's some perspective for you.
He was a beaut. He came on my show one time when I had Joe Frazier and his son. We were doing fathers and sons, and I said to him one time, I said, "Well, Dad, I'm the middle child, and there was the middle child syndrome. I know you don't know anything about that." He says, "I know all about the middle child syndrome, son, and quite frankly, you exploited it." So that's how I had to deal with my father.
Yeah, a lot of people wish they could write as quickly as your dad just had a quip off the top of his
head.
Exactly.
Yeah. Oh boy.
Well, Maury, this has been a pleasure, and I can't thank you enough.
Pleasure.
I don't know if we solved anything other than I am going to plant the flag that Maury is a sports show. It has the ebbs and flows. It is people probably should wear equipment on that stage.
Yeah.
I do want to actually, there is one episode I want to ask you about, and I know you've spoken about it before, so I know I'm not digging too deeply into it.
Right.
There was the boyfriend or husband who kept getting kidnapped. Can you, and it goes to show, I think when you say, why would people come on national television and humiliate themselves? And it goes to the idea that everybody thinks they can beat the lie detector.
Right.
Can you tell the story about the guy who kept getting kidnapped?
Yeah. So this girl, these are young people. I mean, these are people, I think they're in their 20s. And the girlfriend, significant other, was saying, he leaves all the time, and I know he's cheating, and he's giving me this excuse, and I just don't know whether I can believe this excuse. I said, well, what was the excuse? He says, well, he was gone for 3 days, and he said he was kidnapped and held in a trunk. And I actually, I lost it. I mean, I was laughing so hard. I said, wait a second. He says he was kidnapped. He says, yeah, 3 times. 3 times he was kidnapped in a trunk for 3 days. And I just broke up. I just broke up. And the guy comes on, and he's trying to convince her that that's what happened. And of course, he failed the test and everything else. And I went, this is without a doubt the craziest lie detector show I have ever done in my life. The kid has been kidnapped 3 times in a trunk.
I believed him.
Yeah.
Now,
he was so earnest. He was sitting, he was trying to defend this.
Yeah, at some point you think, all right, it's time to bail on this guy. If you're be like, are you sure you want me to read these results?
Exactly. I gave him all kinds of chances. I said, just don't. I don't want to read the result. Why don't you just fess up? Nope.
Now, because lie detectors aren't admissible, there is a percentage that you could beat it. Did you ever get to a result and think, I knew this guy beat it, or he found a way to?
I think so. What we did though was we had the administrator on the show, and so Ralph, he was the guy, Ralph. And every time the guy would say, "Oh no, that lie, the test lied," and Ralph said, "No, the test was right. You were wrong."
Good old Ralph.
Yeah.
Oh, there is another part I wanted to ask you about.
Sure.
Oh, I was just getting ready to wrap it up, and I said Ralph, and it led me to think of my favorite moronic not strategies, not moronic, but your device that you use to really advertise that we're dealing with morons here, or a moron in this particular case, the sexy decoy.
Yeah. I mean, really?
How often did the sexy decoy not work? Was there ever a time when the sexy decoy
10%, 10%,
Okay.
10%?
Those people are true American heroes.
Yeah, I mean, how could you do that, man? You're coming on to take a lie detector test. You're in a room. We send in this decoy, and then next thing you're trying to smooch with her. I mean, what is happening?
And never just a decoy, always a sexy decoy.
Of course.
Well, Maury, this has been a pleasure.
Okay, Tim.
You are a mensch, and again, we barely Oh, was that it? Oh,
I guess we ran a little long.
I think maybe he's had enough of us, but he is a mensch, and the fact that he gave us an hour is pretty impressive. Maybe we'll find a creative way to edit that ending out, or maybe we'll just leave it.
I like it. That should be the cold open.
Do we need to talk about anything else, Jonah? I know based on our last. Oh, he's back. Maybe it was inadvertent.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. I was just saying. I was throwing plaudits at your feet, thanking you for coming on the show. But I'm sure you didn't expect to spend an hour with us.
Well, not only that, my lawyer is calling, so maybe he's
okay. Well, you didn't say anything defamatory on this podcast, so Maury, thanks again for doing this. Get to your lawyer.
My pleasure, Tim. Jonah, thanks so much. Anytime, Tim.
Thank you, Maury.
Bye-bye.
The financial needs of a business go beyond tax and attest services. That's why CTBK goes beyond accounting services and offers outsourced solutions through their affiliation with CFO Solutions Plus. These additional services allow clients to focus on their operational and long-term strategic goals. Trust CTBK's outsourced solutions to provide cost-effective, value-added financial services tailored to your company's needs. Call CTBK at 716-630-2400. Again, 716-630-2400. Or go to ctbk.com to learn more about CTBK's outsourced solutions.
Hi, this is Jeff Glor from CBS News, and you're wasting your precious time with Tim Graham and Friends.
Welcome back to Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK, CPAs and Business Consultants. That was fun. That was a great chat with Maury. And again, I know I said it there to his face, but I just want to reiterate. I mean, what a nice friggin' guy. I mean, he got back to me right away when I reached out to him with a cockamamie request about his show being a sports program. And we've exchanged texts over the last year, and he's always writes back quickly and always wants the last word also with a joke. He's not just, gives you the thumb up emoji or anything like that. It's a conversation. He's just a great guy. And he owes me nothing. He doesn't even know me, but he's very giving of his time.
I had no idea he was such an accomplished golfer. And that was kind of fun to hear some of his golf tales. And it's a little bit inspirational because that's pretty rare to get that good later in life when you didn't start playing and get good at golf as a young athlete. And he being nearly a scratch golfer and is into his 70s and 80s. I should talk to the committee up at the Porter Cup to see if we can get him at the Senior Porter Cup come September, and maybe we can do a live podcast with Maury if he comes up this way.
You should, absolutely. Hell, it'd be good publicity, right? People would come out and cover the thing.
Well, if he's played in the U.S. Senior Amateur, at some point he might have been, beyond the Porter Cup, or definitely someone who should be playing in that field. But maybe as he ages a little bit, he can come down to that Senior Porter Cup level now in his mid 80s.
When do they have that?
In September.
Okay.
The real Porter Cup's coming up next week with the men's and the women's tournament running concurrently, and then the Senior Porter Cup's a couple days in September, a couple weekdays.
I'll even send him a text about it.
All right.
And then, anyways, whatever. That was kind of fun. No, it was very fun. It wasn't even kind of fun. They say don't meet your heroes. Jonah The Buffalo Sabres had their free agency period since we last did a podcast. They didn't do much in free agency. The fans are very upset with Kevyn Adams. Yes, he has made a move or two since then, most notably trading prospect Matt Savoy to the Edmonton Oilers for Ryan McLeod. You know, the cynic in me wonders what Ryan McLeod's initial reaction was to learning about the trade, going from one game away from winning the Stanley Cup and playing with Connor McDavid and a bunch of really good players to being sent to, well, it's not NHL Siberia. Winnipeg's probably still in that role. I don't know. What's the worst market? It used to be Florida, right? You didn't want to get
Ottawa.
Phoenix, right? Or, you know, the Coyotes. Although they're going to Utah, there's some excitement there. Ottawa, yeah, Ottawa. Ottawa's got to be it. Not only the organization, but taxes and the whole thing. The arena in the middle of nowhere. Anyways, Sabres free agency and the various moves, the players they gained, the players they lost. Jonah, you've been covering it for Channel 4. What's your overall assessment on what Kevyn Adams has accomplished, and is it enough?
Well, I'm slightly bullish on the Sabres offseason. I kind of want to measure the praise because I do think it could be a too little too late, or maybe not enough in terms of what they did to change the roster and boost up the talent level to make a run for the playoffs. It's needed. It's long overdue needed for the franchise, but definitely needed for Kevyn Adams probably to preserve his role as the general manager and keep some of this goodwill that was gained with the hiring of Lindy Ruff, because another non-playoff season and missing the playoffs, I think, will squander some of that. But what they did, a lot of the moves that I believe they should have made a year ago, or should have made in season, in the past season or the season before, to add the veteran players and the toughness and to improve the bottom six and to make this team more competitive night in and night out, if not more talented and more offensively explosive and better at scoring goals and more all-star caliber players. They didn't do any of that, but they got players, Sam Lafferty, Jason Zucker, that can fit in the bottom six. Jason Zucker might be playing in the top six, but he has the ability to at least pass for a second line winger and score, be offensive enough to fill in that role at various points. And they needed a third center. Ryan McLeod, maybe if he's not the best third center they could get, or he's not the best NHL player you can get for trading one of your top prospects, he fills the void. He fills the need. The lineup fits in around him and below him in the center spot a lot better than it did when he wasn't on the team. That was the move that most everybody kind of sensed and wanted the Sabres to make at the draft, to maybe trade that pick for a third line center if you couldn't get a top line winger in that deal. That move was made a week later. And really, I think the only quibble you can make there isn't so much the trade that was made. It's Matt Savoy against the other prospects, whether he was the one to give up on, and whether keeping, just to name names, Zach Benson or Yuri Kulik, or this first round pick, Konsta Helenius, whether he's now valued higher in the Sabres. And there's some belief that because maybe he projects more as a center and Matt Savoy more as a wing, that some of these guys did pass Savoy in the prospect rankings, even though Savoy was a slightly higher first round draft pick than the other players that I'm mentioning here. I think that's really the main quibble with the deal, is if they traded the wrong prospect, if 2-3 years down the line go by and Matt Savoy's an excellent NHL player and he's better than some of the young players the Sabres kept, if that was a mistake. But it does seem like internally the Sabres decided that Matt Savoy was expendable, and maybe that decision had been made a little while before that trade, when, they didn't keep him on the roster last year very long. He only played 4 minutes in that first game. They let him go back to juniors when they didn't really want to let Zach Benson do that. And it seems like at some point in the past 2 years since Matt Savoy was drafted, he had fallen out of favor a little bit in terms of his projection long term. And if the Sabres didn't get that much more talented, they didn't make themselves a better fantasy hockey video game type roster, and in some ways maybe worse without Jeff Skinner and Casey Middlestat, they might be a team that's better in terms of winning NHL hockey games, getting to the playoffs, and playing Lindy Ruff's preferred style. I got to believe that a lot of these moves were made in the image of what Lindy Ruff wants from this team. And I would think he's happy with the changes that were made and the mix on the roster, and they didn't touch the defense, which it seems like maybe that's something that Lindy Ruff did like, the personnel that he had on the back end there. At this point in the off season, I think the Sabres got slightly better, but I don't know if they got better enough.
How are we pronouncing Hellenius?
That's how I'm pronouncing it. As I told some of the broadcast people yesterday, I don't have to pronounce it. I only have to spell it. But
so I'm a little confused because I actually covered Sammy Hellenius with the Las Vegas Thunder in the 1990s. But I also know that these names get Americanized incorrectly too often. So when I see it, I think Hellenius, and I think that players, especially young players, and we've talked about it before because it's a story I did, and it's one of the famous favorite stories I ever did, where I went around the Sabres locker room and actually asked the guys to pronounce their names for me and how many of them were done incorrectly, including Dmitry Kalinin and Hendrik Talander and who was the one that started it off? It was Tony Lidman. I'm saying all the wrong names. But yeah, there are a lot of guys. The power play specialist, the winger, big guy, didn't do. Oh, geez, I'm having a senior moment. Alesh Kotalik instead of Kotalik. Anyways, they get butchered quite a bit. So even if you were to ask Consta Hellenius, how is to pronounce his name, my history in asking players about it would leave a small or a greater than 0% chance that he would just go with whatever it's been called instead of what it's really called. Hell, even Steven Hauschka, remember the kicker for the Bills? When he first entered the NFL, they misspelled his name for years and years, and he just didn't correct anybody. Keenan McArdell. Everybody called him Keenan McCardle. He didn't want to correct anybody. He was just happy to be in the NFL. Anyways, I found it interesting, a lot of the rationalization for trading Savoy, and I agree. They have to trade somebody. They need to make some moves. There isn't enough room on the Sabres roster for all these various prospects. They get in a log jam, and perhaps moving Savoy is that first pickle out of the jar that loosens things up. But in some of the explanations from fans that I saw on social media, it was, well, we have Hellenius anyway. So, and that makes me just stop and be like, whoa, wait a minute. The success rate for first round picks in the National Hockey League, especially when you get up into the double digits, and Hellenius being a 14th overall pick, is sketchy at best. I just want to go back and read off some first round picks of the Buffalo Sabres. And these are in order. I'm going to give you some good ones too, but I'm going to go back to 96. I don't know. I'm just kind of picking 96 because that was one that just didn't work out. Everybody had high hopes for 7th overall pick, Eric Rasmussen out of the University of Minnesota. Disappointing career, I think. 545 games, only 52 goals scored. The Sabres moved him out for, after a while. Mika Norinen, a fine talent that was squandered as a goalie in the Sabres system. Dmitry Kalinin, the aforementioned formerly Dmitry Kalinin, had a really good start to his career. Very serviceable. Had he remained healthy in the 06 playoffs, the Sabres might be holding the Stanley Cup right now because he was one of the many defensemen that went down, leading them to have that menagerie of Rochester players on the ice in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals. Barrett Heiston, 10 NHL games. I'm sorry, no NHL goals. He was a 20th overall pick in 99. Artem Kryukov didn't step foot in the National Hockey League. Yuri Novotny, no. Daniel Paille, all right. I mean, he had a career, 582 games as a grinder, but I don't think that's what the Sabres expect Consta Hellenius to be. He's not going to be a grinder who scores 85 goals in almost 600 games in his NHL career. Keith Ballard, a guy who played on half the league for 604 games. He was an 11th overall pick. Yeah, you get to Thomas Vanek, 5th overall. Got to get him early. 13th overall, Drew Stafford. Okay, I don't know if he's going to be a franchise changer. 13th overall in 2005, Marek Zagrapan. Dennis Person in 2006, 24th overall pick. And then you have Tyler Ennis, Tyler Myers, Zach Cassian, Mark Pizik, Joel Armia, Zemgus Girgensons. I mean, I just find it, fascinating that, fans, I mean, these names are out there. I mean, you should be able, I get it. Maybe it's the Bills leaking over into your Sabres fandom about what a first round pick is supposed to be, but these are scratch off tickets and they don't pay off. There's no guarantee here is really what I'm emphasizing.
Yeah, but it could very well be that Matt Savoy is the first round pick that might not work out.
I agree. I just quibble with the response of, hey, we got too many of these guys, and it's okay for us to get rid of Savoy because we have Hellenius. I'm like, no. I mean, neither of these guys are any guarantee.
But the Sabres have some data already on Matt Savoy from his brief time in Buffalo, but he's played a few games in the AHL. He's been to development camp last year. He got hurt in the prospects tournament. I think his size and durability might have been a factor there. The decision that maybe he's a wing and not a center. And I think there's some belief that he's further away than his draft status and age might suggest, and that he became the expendable prospect. And I don't know if that's necessarily true and that's how it's going to be. He could join the long list of players that get traded away from the Sabres and fulfill their potential and win Stanley Cups. It seems they happen every single year now. But it could also be that the Sabres were a little bit ahead of the curve in identifying that he's not quite the prospect that he seems to be in his draft year. And if they waited another year to make that determination, the rest of the league catches up to that, and maybe they can't make the same trade that they made at this point in time.
You're giving Kevyn Adams an awful lot of credit for being that savvy.
Yeah, and I don't know if
really
that's
shown
the truth, but
he's shown no propensity at that.
That's the hope, that they made the right decision with their own prospects, not necessarily the return and the rest of the league, but if they ranked their own players properly and made the right, decision on who to keep and who to get rid of.
Do you think it's enough? Enough to make a difference for the postseason? I
don't think it's totally enough to say absolutely the Sabres have loaded up the roster and are definitely going to make the playoffs. But I think it's an improvement in certain areas, and toughness and size, skating ability. If you look, especially some of the lesser names, even in the bottom six, Beck Melenston and Sam Lafferty are fast skaters for being, kind of grinder type players or in grinder type roles. And that I think that I got to believe that they fulfilled needs that Lindy Ruff wanted, that Lindy Ruff had been coached against the Sabres for the last few seasons. And he said a little bit of this at the season ticket holder event, that the Sabres were a very offensively talented team and had a lot of speed, but that you could figure out ways to defend them and take away their best players and their best scoring abilities, and that they didn't have everything deeper down into the lineup to make you pay for that and to beat you in different ways. And I think maybe a bit of self-scouting that came from opponent scouting. Lindy Ruff might have said, this is how we make the Sabres a team that would have been tougher for the Devils to play a year ago. And if those calculations went into it, it's definitely what Kevyn Adams has been saying, that maybe he's kind of traded some offensive talent and some top line players for bottom line players and toughness and grit and all those type of things. And that seems to fit a bit with Lindy Ruff's coaching style and what this team needs to do. And maybe that carries over a little bit to some of the top line players who are going to be counted on to score the goals, but also need to play a two-way game and a bit better defense. They still need probably to replace Jeff Skinner's role on the power play and on the top line, and that might be very difficult to do. That might have to come from Zach Benson or a prospect or somebody coming up and emerging as that offensive player later on, or JJ Peterka getting even better than he was last year. And I think there's questions maybe with the goaltending. They did make a goaltender move, but I'm not so sure you can count on Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen to be quite that good again and again. And so I don't know if the Sabres did enough to definitely be in the playoffs, but I think that if you're comparing one Sabres team to the previous Sabres team, the coaching change combined with this offseason, I think they improved the potential of the team to be a playoff team next year.
You know, it is the slow part of the sports season, although we do have the Summer Olympics coming up here in a couple of weeks, and we are hoping to have what I think would be a pretty impressive guest next week if we can lock that down. So we will have a little Olympic discussion on the podcast in some way, shape, or form. But you made it clear on the last podcast, Jonah, your feelings on talking about Bills in mid-July. So I will avoid that landmine.
Yeah. Thank you. Appreciate
What
that.
else do you want to talk about here before we wrap things up?
Well,
Anything?
Bills camp's coming quickly, but
I just said.
Right. But I'm still, from my perspective, a week away from that. Got a couple local events with my eye on that I'll be covering next week. The Porter Cup being one of them. And the FC Buffalo women's soccer team is hosting the United Women's Soccer Championships, their semifinals and championship game. They're hosting the game either way, but if they make it to that, that'll be a Buffalo team with an opportunity to win a championship in Buffalo, which is always kind of a fun thing. And this FC Buffalo women's team is very competitive. They're back at All High this season, which they hadn't played the last 2 years, and that's a fitting venue for both the men's and the women's soccer team. So, not to say I'm rooting for them to win that semifinal, but in a way I am, because I think that could be kind of an interesting event, especially for fans of women's soccer, women's sports, and young soccer players in the area. That'll be next Sunday after the Porter Cup on Saturday. But all that said, the biggest sporting event coming up in Buffalo might be Kyle Brandt throwing that first pitch at the Bison's game next Saturday night, and that being maybe the unofficial kickoff to Bills training camp fever. For our audio listeners, you might not have caught Tim's eye roll there because it was loud and clear on the video.
Major League Baseball draft is Sunday through Tuesday. Jonah, are there any locals to look at? Baseball?
I know of two that were from local colleges, one being a Western New York local that was playing at Canisius, who have since transferred to other colleges, but Jackson Strong from West Seneca, who was the preseason MAC Player of the Year at Canisius, and now he's transferred to Tennessee, but he was a top player for Canisius the last couple of years and a local. I believe he could possibly get drafted. Eric Radizak, who was the MAC Player of the Year for Niagara this past year, and as I understood, he could have been, he has an opportunity to get drafted, but he's since transferred to Tennessee as well. Actually, Jackson Strong has transferred to Kentucky, and Eric Radizak is transferred to Tennessee. There could be some others, but there's no Joe Mack or Charlie Mack that I'm aware of being first or second round prospects or Jonah Heim types, that local players that will be drafted out of high school and will be bona fide high round picks. But, there's some decent college baseball teams in this town, and one or two of their players or pitchers. Niagara Community College pretty much every year has somebody that's possibly going to get drafted in one of the very last rounds, and I think they might have a pitcher this year that could fit that bill.
I think Charlie Mack might be out of baseball already, Jonah. I think I was checking out some stats recently, and he doesn't have any in 2024.
But he was a high draft pick, and he was a player like his brother. His brother was a higher draft pick that going into his senior year of high school was going to be drafted in one of the higher rounds. And, he had a lot of college scouts, or professional scouts, I should say, and college recruiters at his high school games. And I don't believe, I could be wrong because I don't cover the high school scene quite as often as I used to, but I don't think there were any high school players in West New York this year that drew that kind of attention.
Charlie was a 6th round pick in 2018 of the Minnesota Twins, went right to that organization that summer, never made it out of A+ ball, and appears to, unless he's injured, maybe he is still fighting it, but he batted last year. He only played 9 games last season for Cedar Rapids of the A+ Midwest League. Batted 103. Year before that, he played 57 games, also for Cedar Rapids, batted 166 with 5 home runs in 213 plate appearances. So And he was, I believe he was I don't know, how does the Gatorade New York Player of the Year, does that by sport, or was he like for all boys?
No, they do. Well, I think they do both. They do
Will East.
they do it one for every sport, but I also believe there might be a Gatorade New York State Male Athlete of the Year and Female Athlete of the Year that accompanies all of the sports.
Yeah. All right, Jonah, let's save some for next week. And hopefully everybody stuck around. And I want to appreciate or extend my appreciation to everybody out there who subscribes, who listens, who watches, who likes and comments and all that good stuff. I think I might cut this last part out.
Maybe you could chop it up and get rid of the pauses.
Yeah. No, that's too much work. Multiple cuts on this software that I use is a real pain in the balls. Which is why we have a pretty no frills podcast here. Everybody else's video looks pretty fancy. You know, they got extra ads. We only have one sponsor here at Tim Graham and Friends, brought to you by CTBK CPAs and Business Consultants, and that's all we need. CTBK is our I was going to say it's our boy. I guess those are our boys. 4 of them. All right. This may be one of the more awkward finishes to Tim Graham and Friends.